All right, so we are studying the Tractate Makkot, and we are on the very last few words of 7b. But since a couple of you weren't here last time, I'll give you a little bit of a overview of where we stand, because we're sort of in the middle of a subject. So the subject goes as follows. We are talking about killers who killed unintentionally, and therefore they have to run to a refuge city, right? That's where we are. And there are several, and the purpose of running to a city of refuge, is to atone. It's not a punishment, it's cleansing exercise, so to speak, to allow the killer to repent. It's part of the repentance, part of the atonement, part of the cleansing of that sin that the person just went through, that just caused. Okay? Now, that privilege of being atoned for killing someone unintentionally, that's a pretty severe sin. I'm just going to mute you, Marty, because there are some noises that are coming there. If you want to talk, just have to unmute yourself, all right? If you don't mind. If I can get to click it. All right, so mute. There we go. So this privilege of being allowed to be atoned for such a severe sin as killing is, and only certain people are entitled to it, not everybody. Because when someone kills intentionally, they don't, obviously they have a different punishment. They get death basically for an eye for an eye, so to speak. They're being killed for their sin. But when someone does it unintentionally, you have degrees. So you have gross negligence and negligence, and duress, under duress. Someone drove at 60 miles an hour on a highway, and somebody jumped in front of their car, and they have absolutely no way. In the middle of the night, they didn't see him coming. There is no way they can do anything about it. So someone who unintentional, that is really not their fault. It's under duress. It's honest. They were forced to do it. They don't need to go to exile, to the refuge city. Someone who did gross negligence, it's like, you should have known. You should have known better, and we will see several examples of what does that mean. They are also not going, because it's not intentional, but you should have known better. We don't allow you. We don't give you this opportunity to be to atone via refuge city. Only the one in the middle, which is unintentional, but it's not gross negligence, they are going to exile. Now, so that's the basic rule. Now, the Mishnah here is talking about the Torah. When the Torah is talking about the bringing the details of the law, the halachic laws, it's giving an example of someone who are chopping wood with an axe, and the axe slipped and killed someone, or the hand of the person slipped, and somehow with the axe they killed someone. Let me show you the actual verse. Okay, this is the actual verse. So, for instance, it's talking about that you should have 3 cities of refuge, and you should make the roads to the cities of refuge. And who is entitled to go to the cities of refuge is someone manslaughter that who killed unintentionally or unwittingly, without having animosity in the past to that person. Okay? And then the Torah itself is bringing an example. For instance, a man goes with his neighbor into a grove, into a forest, to chop wood, and his hands swing the axe to cut down the tree, and the axe head flies off the handle and strikes the other person, and he dies. So the man, this is called unintentional because it's a good axe. They used it many times and it didn't kill anyone, it didn't fly off. And now he used it and the piece of metal flew off the handle and killed someone else. So that person should be fleeing to the city of refuge. So this is the example. Now, there is a this is one interpretation, the interpretation that the actual piece of metal flew off the handle and the piece of metal killed someone. Another interpretation is that the axe did not break. The piece of metal of the axe did not fly off the handle. What happened was, when the person chopped the wood, a splinter, a shrapnel, a piece of wood that he hit the axe, and a piece of wood dislodged from the tree, and that piece of wood flew and killed someone. It happens, that's also so the question is, what actually flew? What actually happened unintentionally? Is it the axe that flew off the handle, or it's a piece of shrapnel, piece of wood that flew off the tree as the person was hacking it with the axe? So there is a disagreement now between Rabbi and the rabbis. Rabbi says that if the axe is flying off the handle, that is not that's not negligence. That's gross negligence, because a person should have known that the axe is faulty. They should have checked it, and in that case, it's almost intentional. It's a criminal. It's not intentional, but it's criminal. The person should have known, and therefore he is not entitled to run away to the refuge city. This is what Rabbi says. The rabbis are saying that this is exactly what the Torah is talking about, clearly, that the piece of metal flew off the handle, and so therefore this is what's called unintentional. Now, the other case where a piece of wood flew off the tree that you were chopping and that piece killed, so the Rabbi says this is when you go to refuge city. That's his opinion. That's his interpretation of the verse, and he says that's what the Torah is saying, that in that case you go to refuge city. And the rabbis are saying, no, that kind of thing, it's honest. It's under duress. He couldn't have done anything. When you hit an axe with the axe, you hit the tree. You have no real possibility of knowing where the piece of wood is going to fly to. You need someone to calculate the physics in order to do that, and nobody can do it as they are chopping wood. And therefore, it's such a light unintentional that a person does not need atonement for it to run to a refuge city. So that's the difference between Rabbi and Chachamim and the rabbis, whether in the interpretation of the verse. Okay? Now, what is the essence of the difference between the Rabbi and the rabbis? It's a fundamental difference between how you read a verse and how you interpret the verse in the Torah. We know that the Torah is written without vowels, right? Without the nikud, just the letters. And we also know that in Hebrew, you need the vowels to understand what the meaning of the word is. One little dot changes it from past to future, to present, to possibility, to direct, to third party. I mean, there are different differences that are material. Here, the key word is venashal. Okay, this word, venashal. This word is written nun shin lamed. Now, because there are no dots in the Torah, you can write it nashal, meaning that the head, the piece of the ox head, the piece of metal flew off the handle. That's one interpretation. Or you can interpret it nishal, that it made something else fly. That the ox made something else fly, and that is the wood of the tree that he chopped, and that wood flew. So the question is how you read it. How are you reading it? The simple way, the way it's written is nun shin lamed. It's venashal. That's the simple way of putting the dots of nikud here. Nishal is a more, you need to know it, and you can read it that way, but you need to know that that's what it means. What do I mean by you need to know? Moshe Rabbeinu came off the mountain with the tablets, and then he wrote the Sefer Torah. He wrote the scroll, the first scroll, the scroll that Moshe Rabbeinu wrote. That's a very precious Sefer Torah. It used to be in the temple, and that's the original text. When he wrote it also without the dots, but he taught the people how to read it. And then he copied it and wrote another Sefer Torah for each one of the tribes, for each one of the Shvatim. So he wrote 13. One that was kept in Bet HaMikdash, and another 12 that was given, one per tribe. So he taught the people how to read. This teaching of Moshe Rabbeinu of how to read every single word of the Torah is called the tradition, Masoret. That is our tradition. And that tradition was transmitted from father to son until our generation. That's how we know how to read certain words. So you have the way that you can read the text as is without the tradition. Like, somebody off the street, you give it to a kid that just learned Hebrew, they will read it venashal, meaning that the piece of the head of the ox flew off the handle. Or you can read it like the tradition as Moshe Rabbeinu taught us, venishal, meaning that it flew, it made something else fly. Now, tradition obviously has some questions, because throughout the years you would have people that got the tradition transmitted to them one way, and other people that the tradition, the Masorah, the tradition was transmitted to them a different way. So when it's written in the words, all of the Sefer Torah, with the exception of one letter, all of the Sifrei Torah are 100% the same, similar, identical. There is one word in one parasha, we'll talk about it some other time, either a Hey or Aleph, but there is one letter in the entire Torah that there is a difference of opinion whether it's this way or that way. Most saying it's Aleph, some saying it's Hey, but there's one letter. Everything else is identical letter-wise. But the tradition, you have a little more differences. And this is one of the differences. Okay? So what are we saying? We're saying that Rabbi... Now that we have two ways of interpreting one pasuk, one basically the way it's written, and one the way the tradition was given to us, right? Those are two different interpretations. The question is, which interpretation is stronger? Which one takes over? Which one is the main one? Which one is the prevailing one when we're dealing with halacha? And that's where we left last time. So Rabbi is saying that the main one is the tradition, and the rabbis are saying that the main one is the way it's written. There are, by the way, several places in the Torah. You find it almost in every parasha. There is one or two of them where there is a word that's written one way, but it's read completely different way, or slightly different way. With the Vav, without the Vav, with the Yud, without the Yud, and sometimes it's totally different way of reading it. Okay? So, when we learn in shul, someone who prepares for learning needs to know, that when they come to the Torah, they will read, they will see the word who, but he has to read it he, or he, and he has to read it who. It's a very fundamental thing that a Baal Koreh needs to know. So, and that appears almost in every parasha several times. So which one is the main one? When we need to learn from the words of the Torah, we need to learn a halachic detail, a law. Which one is we going by? Are we going by the letters, or are we going by the tradition? So Rabbi is saying we're going by the tradition, according to what we saw here. He says he's going by the tradition because he's reading Venishal, which is not the way a kid of first grade would read this word. They would read it like the rabbis are saying. Okay, so now the Gemara is asking, you're telling me that Rabbi is from the school of thought that the tradition is prevailing? It doesn't make any sense, because we have V'amar Rav Yitzchak Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi. So in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, there is a saying that Rabbi and Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz ubet Shammai veRabbi Shimon veRabbi Akiva, those are five people, Rabbi veRabbi Yehuda ben Roetz veBet Shammai, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Akiva. They all are of the opinion that the main prevailing interpretation of every single verse, every single word in the Torah is the way it's written. That's the authoritative, the authoritative way is the way it's written, not the way you vocalize it, not the way the tradition tells you to read it. And this statement is in Masechet Sanhedrin, and over there the Gemara is going to an extreme length to prove that each one of those five rabbis indeed is of that opinion, that the written word is prevailing. So how are we saying here that Rabbi, which is one of those five people, is of the opinion that tradition is prevailing? That doesn't make sense. So the Gemara is saying this is the reason why Rabbi gave a second reason. Okay? And for that we have to go back to what we learned last time. What we learned last time is that Rabbi is saying that the interpretation of the verse here is that the ox is made a piece of wood fly, and that's what killed, not the actual head of the ox, right? And he brought two reasons for it. One reason is what we just discussed, that he is reading it differently than it's written. And even though usually he is of the opinion that the written word prevails, here he is of the opinion that the way you vocalize it prevails as an exception, which is possible. Everybody, have exceptions. This is one reason. But he also brought a second reason. He brought a second reason why, in his opinion, what was happening here is that not the piece of metal flew off the handle, it's that the piece of wood that was chopped flew. Because what he's saying is as follows. We have in this verse, examine this verse a little bit. In this verse, we have twice the word wood, ha'etz. Okay? Twice the word, the wood. And how do we read it? So the interpretation here is not exactly, so the way it's written here, it's not exactly the way it's I would translate it. So let me translate word for word exactly. And if someone will come with his friend to the forest for the purpose of chopping wood, and his hand swinged, or his hand sort of got off track when he was holding the axe for chopping the wood. He was holding the axe to chop the wood, and his hand swung, and then that's the word. Then the piece of something flew off the wood. Okay, and that's the question: what flew off the wood? All right. So there are twice that we're saying the word wood here, and the first time it's clearly the wood that we are chopping. Right. The person came to the forest in order to chop a piece of wood. So that's the wood. The first word wood in this verse is talking about the wood that's being chopped. So Rabbi is saying, just like the first time in this verse, the word wood means the wood that's being chopped, so is the second time in this verse where when we say the word wood, it doesn't mean the handle, the wood that's holding the axe, the axe handle. It means the wood that's being chopped. And that's when it says that wood that's being chopped flew off. So that's the second proof that Rabbi brings in order to tell us, to justify his opinion. So Rabbi went through the lengths of bringing two reasons, because the first reason was not enough. What is the first reason? The first reason is that the tradition prevails. And he knew that that's not enough, because usually he is of the opinion that the written word prevails. And he knew that that's not going to fly, when they come to justify his opinion, it's not going to fly now. So suddenly he has an exception. Why? Where does it say that he has an exception? So that's why he went through the length of bringing a second reason to tell us that is his opinion. I will open the floor for questions if you have any.
I'm not getting something. So originally there was no Nikodot, right? There was nothing. So the only way for us was to know how to read it was tradition, right?
Correct.
Right. So when now over there in when we looked into Dvarim right now, we see Nikodot, right?
Yes.
And now and how did that come about? Because that's apparently what is causing us say that this is the right way of reading it, and the other way is just traditional way of reading it, right?
So
how did that come about?
Okay, good question. So this goes to the whole chain of evolution of the Torah, or how we end up with books. Okay, and let me just step one step back and just say that we have the Torah, we know, is made out of two parts. Torah shebichtav, the written law, and Torah shebaal peh, the oral law, right? You walk into any house, any Jewish home or any shul, you see mounds of books. So, and it's all written. But it's really mostly the oral law. The written law is only the 5 books that Moshe Rabbeinu brought from Har Sinai, right? From Mount Sinai. What happened? What happened is that, in those days when you didn't have the printing press and you didn't have paper, people, in order to learn, they had to develop a very, very good memory and an ability to understand and memorize mountains of information. Nowadays, that part of our brain is a little numb, and evolution sort of killed it a little bit, because we can Google everything right away. We don't need to remember a thing. So what happened is that in the beginning, everything everything except those words that were written was oral, was transmitted to us orally by Moshe Rabbeinu. As time progresses and we found ourselves in wars, we found ourselves in exile, we found ourselves not being able to concentrate, and we found ourselves forgetting pieces of law, and then needing to figure out or sort of fish it from our memory somehow, which happened several times during history. The rabbis decided, you know what? We can't trust the human race to keep memorizing so much information. We have to write the oral law. Even though we're not allowed to, originally, officially, we're not allowed to write the oral law. We're supposed to only remember it and talk it, we have to write it because otherwise people will forget. So in later generations, hundreds of years after Moshe Rabbeinu was no longer with us, hundreds of years later, a whole bunch of people, after they got the okay from the rabbis to write the oral law, and that and that came again in steps. First the Mishnah, then the Gemara, then other pieces. So they started putting together their version of their tradition, and because it passed 1,000 or 1,500 years since Moshe Rabbeinu actually told it to us, it came about that you have different versions. You take a Chumash. In the Chumash is not as it's a lot. There are a lot of most of the words are the same, are written the same, but you do have here and there different ways that according to one opinion is read one way, and according to another opinion read another way. Almost in every parsha you have one or two of those. Okay, that there is a difference in how the Nikud goes. Not too many. So 50 or 100 total in the Torah. But the tradition included a whole lot of other things, and there you have a lot more differences, many more differences. So that's how you ended up here with an online library that has all of the Nekudot. Because, without the Nekudot we won't know.
Right. So when we say that this you name like rabbis who follow the way it's written, right? No, and then opposite to it, there are rabbis who follow tradition, their tradition, I guess.
Right.
The way they got the Masorah.
Right.
So, but the way it's written is means that they follow that.
Those both rabbis don't have any difference what is the Masorah and what's written. They agree that this is the Masorah and this is what's written. The question is what prevails. Does it prevail what's written, or does it prevail what's being transmitted?
But we don't know what's written because we don't know how to.
We do.
Really, we can't say what's written because we don't have Nikodot. It's Nashal or Nishal, right? We don't know.
Well, the thing is that we do know. The thing is that we do know, and those rabbis do agree that there is a tradition that you read it Nishal, but the way it's written is Nashal. So a lot of those differences between what's written and what's said is agreed upon everyone, or about many. But the question is what is prevailing when you're coming to.
I'm still not getting. How do we know what is written? Nashal is without Nikodot. We don't know, right?
That's the tradition, but that's tradition. You have people who wrote it, early on, and that's the way, and they wrote it early on, and we accept it the way as an authority. For example, you have a certain Tanakh that was available in the olden days, and we don't have it now. It's someone, the name of Asher, the son of someone, Asher something, wrote it, and that is considered the most exact Tanakh. And the Rambam had it, and he said that he saw it, and he wrote in his Mishneh Torah, in his big the Rambam, the Mishneh Torah, the Rambam.
Correct.
He wrote exactly how to read each word. Each word that you have a difference of opinion, he wrote how to read it. You read this one with a chirik. You read this one with a patach. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So he wrote all of those things, and so is the Minchat Shai also wrote it, and you have several others that are known to be medakdekim, you know, people that are really concentrating on the grammar in an extreme way, and they're considered authorities.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
all right,
Okay. Thank you.
all right,
Thank you.
all right.
Isn't that Rashi's strength, that his understanding of the language was so specific, so detailed, that it gave them this great insight that we use?
Yes. Rashi is one of the masters of those, and Rashi, in many of his explanations, he simply tells you how to read the word. You read it with a segol, and when you read it in a segol, you understand a whole different way than if you read it with a patach or a kamatz. Right? So Rashi, that's his strength, indeed, and it's interesting that Rashi in the Gemara takes a little bit of a different. When it's Rashi is written for the Torah, he wrote it specifically lipshuto shel mikra, to understand the simplest way of reading it, just to get the basic idea. When he wrote his interpretation, his commentary on the Talmud, he didn't go with that, with that method. He was doing a little bit more to understand the idea, to understand a whole bunch of other things behind it. Nonetheless, because it's Rashi and it's the same person, many times in yeshiva, you read Rashi, and you just don't, either you read it wrong or you don't understand what you read, and then you read commentary and say, you have a question on Rashi, or you don't understand the Gemara, how come the Gemara is saying that? I used to have a very good teacher, his name was Monye Schnell, and all he did, in order to explain most of our questions, he says, come, let's read Rashi together. And the way he read it, where he put the commas, where he put, the intonation, how he used the vowels, the question disappeared. He was the master of that. And so, yeah, Rashi is one of those guys. Anyway, all right. Let's Amar Rav Papa. Here's a related case. A related case is when someone is taking a piece of dirt, a bundle of dirt, and throws it on a date tree. Okay, I'm sure you guys have seen how dates are grown on trees, right? You have those clumps. You have those. A bunch of them are tied together in one branch, right? And a lot of dates. So in the olden days, in order to get it down, you had one of two ways of doing it. Either you climb up the tree, which sometimes is very high, or you take a stone or you take dirt and you throw it and you try to get them down to you. Okay, so somebody was throwing something through either a stone or a piece of dirt on a date tree, and he was able to hit the dates, and the dates fell, but they fell on someone's head and killed him, a kid or someone who was, So what happened? Rav Papa is saying this is exactly the same disagreement that we have in the Mishnah between Rabbi and Rabbanan, right? What does Rabbi say? Rabbi say that that it's similar to the piece of wood that was dislodged, and therefore the person goes to exile. And the rabbis are saying no. This is a person couldn't have done. He couldn't have known that the dates are going to fly on someone's head. and he's not. It's under duress, and it was forced on him, and therefore he is not. Doesn't have to. That's what Rav Papa is saying here. Okay, so the Gemara is asking Pshita. I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's exactly the same as the story in the Gemara with the axe. Why do we have to say it again? So the Gemara is answering, very interesting. One would think that it's a power of his power. What do I mean? It's like once removed. When someone is holding the axe and they're hitting the chopped wood, at one point their hand with the axe touched that piece of wood that was flying, and that piece of wood flew and killed someone. But when someone is throwing a stone high up at a tree, so the stone leaves the hand already. So that's one, his force, but then it's his force's force, because the stone hit something else, and that something else killed. So in that case, you would think that Rabbi is saying that it's not, it's definitely not intentional. It's a person was forced to do it. It happened to him. He didn't have any choice. And you would think that in that case, Rabbi would agree that a person does not go to exile. So comes Rav Papa and say, no. Even his force's force, like once removed, is also something that that he should have known or should have anticipated somehow. And therefore he needs to run to exile. So the Gemara is asking now something else. He says, okay, so it seems that Rabbi is very strict, and he says that, if it's for your force or force's force, you still need to go to exile. But until when? How many, once removed, two removed, three removed, how many times? What is the situation where Rabbi will agree that the person was, under duress, he didn't have any control over it, it happened to him, and he shouldn't be going to exile? When does that happen? So the Gemara is answering, when you have one more level. And what does it mean when they have one more level? That a person had a piece of stone, and they threw it at the tree. When they got to the tree, they didn't hit the dates. They hit another branch. And that branch dislodged and fell. And that branch caused the dates to fall. And those dates fell on someone's head. So it's like 3 times. It's his force that caused the accident. And in that case, Rabbi would agree that a person does not go to exile. And that is the, that is the end of that discussion. Any questions? All right. So I don't know that we're gonna have much. I'm just gonna give. We're just gonna start a little bit, and sort of we'll repeat the beginning again next time. Just an idea of what we're going to be talking next time. We are giving again an example of something that happened unintentionally, and a person therefore would need to go to run to exile to a refuge city. If someone throws a stone to Reshut HaRabim, to a public domain, they stand in their own yard and they throw to the public domain, and that stone killed someone. So, they didn't mean to kill someone, but it happens that a person passed by, or a person was standing there, and he was hurt and killed. So the first rabbi in the Mishnah is saying that person has to run to refuge city. He has to go to exile. Rabbi Lezer ben Yaakov says, however, what happens if a person is throwing a stone, and after the stone left the person's hand, as the stone was traveling through the air, another person, the deceased now, stuck his head outside of a window, and that stone hit him. He wasn't there when the person started throwing. When the person threw the stone, the head was inside. but then the person stuck his head out and the stone hit him and he died. So Rab Lezer ben Yaakov says, then it's really, the person didn't have absolutely no responsibility for any of that. That's crazy, and he should not be receiving the exile. He should not be running to exile. So, and then there is later a discussion whether Tanakama, it's among the Rishonim, whether Tanakama, the first rabbi, is disagreeing with the second rabbi, or the second rabbi is just explaining the first rabbi. We'll talk about it next time. We'll talk about it next week.